Hello everyone, it's your bud. I'm in so much pain that I just want to punch a hole in my laptop screen, but today's just awful. We were going to be talking about survival of the fittest or natural selection in a world with crazy abilities, maybe from radiation like the Fallout or Metro series, or maybe a world with superheroes like My Hero Academia or One Punch Man, where the monsters of One Punch Man are like shunned and like where would they go? Maybe there's an area of wilderness where they'd all flock to. Maybe there's a world with a gene therapy procedure or an experiment by a mad scientist gone wrong that makes these like mutated beings of mutated DNA and manipulated DNA that's all primal and feral and just instinctual. Or maybe this is a world with a power that allows one to manipulate their own body or another's body, form, or DNA. So whether through mutation, science, or superpowers, this is a world where a form can be changed. And instead of like talking about the actual natural selection and survival of the fittest and the whole I wrote like half of a script, but as I said, I'm in so much pain I just want to punch a hole through my laptop screen and I can't even sit up straight. So today, instead of talking about the world, I'm just going to be mentioning the monster. And I'm just going to be mentioning a little tiny bit about this monster. If you want to know more, then please let me know. I'll make a part 2 on the monster or a part 2 on the world. So this is going to be super bad. I can't even sit up straight. I'm like, I seriously just, I want to scream right now. That's how bad it is. So I'm just going to have to do this basically as a list. So you start it with a crocodile, but make it stand almost like an amphibian would. So it's got 2 powerful back legs for leaping, and then it's got its 2 front legs, arms that it can balance with. And it'd be sort of like a great ape where it sort of walks on the knuckles for that. And it's got these 2 big powerful front arms as well, but not quite as large as those 2 giant powerful back legs for leaping. It's got the big tail of the crocodile hanging back and the giant crocodile's head up front. Now it also have these big back spikes as well, but imagine if underneath the spikes running all the way down through to the tip of the tail was something that it could unfurl, and that would be like a peacock's feathers. So imagine if like a peacock it could unfurl giant, like almost feather-like structures, but they might not be entirely feathers, and they'd be sort of similar to a cuttlefish or an octopus where they can change the color or the texture of it. Now cuttlefish have these really cool things where they can hypnotize their prey by having fast-moving patterns that they can create over their skin. So imagine that, but a sort of predatory thing. So these big feathers can like flash up and move around and like, I don't know, it can act as sort of expressionary things. So instead of feathers, think of it like the jellyfish or something like that, where they can create lights. Think of it as a mix of feathers of a peacock as well as sort of cuttlefish or octopus, how they can have patterns or stuff like that. But imagine thinking of it also like jellyfish lights. So imagine if it could unfurl these things that could be kind of moving if it chose to move it, or it could keep it rigid if it chose to keep it rigid. So they could both be fine on land and underwater. They could sort of flow and look like they're, I don't know, kelp or something like that. Now mix this a bit with a few other things, sort of like the stoplight loose jaw, which is a type of dragonfish. It has these red photophores right underneath its eyes, and these red photophores help it see in a completely different wavelength than most other fish see. And most fish see in blue, and the stoplight loose jaw can also see in red light, so it's got that as well. Now I do have the Dunkleosteus listed here as well. The Dunkleosteus had this giant like big toothy thing. Its entire skull was its teeth, and if you can combine that a bit to have a slightly more rounded head, so it's slightly more rounded, and it's sort of, imagine skull sort of helmet over top of it, you know, like how Cubone you know Cubone, how it's got that over skull on top. So imagine if there was something like that, but it was see-through. It was almost clear, and within or underneath it was sort of colonies of maybe some things like what sea cucumbers do. Sea cucumbers steal things to do photosynthesis. So if you can steal these things and have them growing in these big colonies underneath this sort of like skull layer, then it could also be a sort of like a sea cucumber. Then it could photosynthesize. And then also underneath that layer you could have things sort of like some DNA like axolotl or hydra DNA. Now axolotls are a type of salamander that have learned to stay in their juvenile stage, so they've never turned into adults, and therefore they keep their gills. Now adults lose the gills in most salamanders, but axolotls have managed to keep themselves at like a youthful state. But you mix that with hydras. Hydras are these beings that are basically immortal as long as they want to live. They can keep themselves dividing and keep living. So imagine colonies of sort of hydra-esque mixed with photosynthesizing bacteria underneath this big skull cap layer thing, and that covers most of the body. So this being is this giant sort of crocodile beast. It's got these 2 back legs, but then something that's not written here is the 2 front arms. They would unfurl like a praying mantis, and underneath in that inside space where they unfurl, big wings would unfurl. So they could actually be like the demon from Metro. The demons from Metro have 2 wings, but they have 2 wings on their back. Imagine if the 2 front arms, very much like the flying kaiju from Pacific Rim. In the first Pacific Rim movie, there's one point where these 2 arms of this kaiju go up, and then these giant wings sprout out of it. Now imagine if this thing could leap with its 2 giant, powerful, sort of amphibian-like back legs, very much sort of like a Goliath toad or something like that. And then it could also unfurl like a mantis. It unfurls its arms, but instead of a mantis thing, it's giant wings underneath. So this thing can glide, and it's got its giant tail where the peacock sort of things come out. So it could sort of unfurl a bunch of things and have a sort of like wide splayed out tail, and it could have this sort of wide splayed out wings for its arms as well. So it could kind of do this gliding motion. I'm not sure if you've ever seen a peacock fly, but peacocks can do this sort of gliding thing. So it'd sort of be like that. And then, so yeah, sort of got the mix of like the sort of jellyfish, cuttlefish thing where it can create different lights, and a mix of the peacock where it's got this display, a mix of sort of amphibious but also land things. So it's basically just a crocodile, but it's got these big amphibian sort of back legs where it can do these giant leaping motions. Goliath toads can leap so far. I think they can leap like, I don't know, I don't even want to misquote it because it's just so crazy. And then it's got a bit of the Hydra / axolotl DNA, because perhaps it can keep itself at a juvenile stage, or not necessarily juvenile, but keep itself from aging. And also jellyfish. There are some jellyfish, I think it's box jellyfish, that have proven that they can just regenerate their cells. So mixing the jellyfish lights with also the jellyfish life, mixing that with like the Hydra. So imagine if this thing had sort of colonies of photosynthesizing bacteria under this sort of clear mask, but the mask would be like an extra bony thing, sort of like a Dunkleosteus. So it's got this giant toothy maw with a super powerful bite, covered in a sort of overlay of another skull that within it could have these sort of photosynthesizing bacteria. And I'd imagine imagine if it would grow almost this sort of kelpy, almost like a fingernail-like structures that would grow out of it, like a beard or something like that. And over years it could grow this stuff, so it could basically just sit in one place, and it could grow this sort of textured, almost fingernail sort of like substance that would grow over it, and that would allow it to have its photosynthesizing bacteria grow outside of its body. And perhaps every single one of those strands of the giant peacock tail could also be holding bacteria like that. So it could spread out this giant sort of peacock fan thing in the sun, and have a bunch of, like, imagine little beard things that grow off of it, but those are external things for the photosynthesizing bacteria. So if it needs to, it can just lie there in one place and hibernate, basically growing these external things to house these bacteria for photosynthesizing. Or it could unfurl its giant tail if it needs to. Well, not tail, but it's the tail all the way up to the shoulders is where the peacock thing sort of sits. So yeah, it can be used for sort of displays and a sort of like flashing lights. And I know this was super shitty, but yeah, this is all I can do today. So hopefully you enjoyed this. If you want a part 2 of the monster, where I go more in depth on how all of these things can interact and what things I didn't talk about, then let me know. Or if you want a part 2 on the world, where what would a world where a whole bunch of mutated creatures like this, or maybe this is a superpower where it can transform its body into any amount of animals it wants, because that's a common superpower in lots of comics as well. So maybe this is a human that can transform into this, whatever you think. But yeah, this was the River Maw, basically a crocodile that can leap like an amphibian, unfurl its 2 giant front arms, and they can be like a mantis, except wings would come out like the flying kaiju from Pacific Rim. It's sort of got the peacock feathers, or peacock feather things that can spread out into this giant display, but it would display very much like a cuttlefish, where it could have a whole bunch of like waving, moving lines, or it could make it look like it has giant eyes like a butterfly, where when a butterfly's wings come out, it looks like it has giant eyes. It could create patterns on those giant things that unfurl. And then of course it can photosynthesize, so it doesn't need to eat eat all the time, but it could. I think this thing would be really, really powerful in rivers, being able to like be in the shallows, but also leap out quickly. And I don't know, I think it'd be a super, super scary thing. So yeah, that was my mix of what I thought were the coolest things. Oh, and also it's got the stoplight loose jaws ability to see in red light as well. Well, not see in red light, but see by the aid of red light. Yeah, so I know there's more to talk about, so if you want a part 2 on this, then let me know. I'd be happy to discuss this more when I'm feeling a bit better. So thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this cool creature. If you could mix any number of any animals together to create any type of creature, what would you create? Let me know in the comments below. Would you prefer air, sea, or land, or a mix of in between? I think I'd prefer enough of the sea to stick close to the rivers, but also be on land, but just enough to sort of glide as well with flying in the air. So it's not as fast as some things in the air and not as mobile in the sea, but it's very, very resilient, I think, in both the sea, land, and it can be kind of comparable in the air, especially if it was gliding down to you from above, or if it had leaped up from the water with those giant powerful back legs and then was snapping its giant crocodile maw at you. I think this would be a very scary beast. So this was the river maw. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, and all of that. Hopefully I'll be better in the next few days and be back to my normal self. See you in the next video. Have a good day. Bye-bye.